This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China and Greece sign 16 deals in sectors including energy. UN urges more action against infestation of locusts devastating crops. And Somalia launches tree planting program to help solve climate change. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Karen Roberts, live in Nairobi. Panina joins me now with all your business headlines.
Thank you, Karen. And coming up on Africa Live Business, Africa Development Bank eyes deals worth $67 billion at flagship investment conference in South Africa. And Zambia's President Edgar Lungu cuts government spending to control debt levels. I'll have details of those stories and plenty more in just a bit. For now, it's back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Panina. We begin in Athens, where China and Greece have signed a total of 16 governmental and business agreements. During a joint press conference with the visiting Chinese President Xi Jinping, the Greek Prime Minister said the deals cover various fields which will open up a much stronger cooperative relationship.
Both sides see China and Greece as natural partners for building the Belt and Road. We would like to mesh the Belt and Road initiative more closely with the development strategy of this country. We look forward to implementing cooperation plans in priority areas and to fully leverage the transshipment role of the Port of Piraeus and to further strengthen the transportation capacity of the China-Europe Land-Sea Express Line. I'm sure we'll make the most of the Joint Committee on Economy and Trade and continually expand two-way trade and mutual investment and to unleash the potential in energy, transportation, and financial cooperation.
And this marks the important thing in the day. I'm talking about the signing of 16 government and business agreements between Greece and China and many levels and many different sectors. So this is a road that we've now opened, but this road will soon become a highway because our bilateral collaboration will become even stronger.
Well, ahead of the press conference, President Xi and the Greek Prime Minister had in-depth talks on strengthening bilateral relations and mapping out the blueprint for future cooperation. President Xi is in Greece for a 3-day state visit. It's the first visit by a Chinese leader to the European nation in 11 years. Media outlets in Greece have broadcast a feature programme called Historic Journey. The programme details achievements made in the 70 years since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. The programme is a production of China Media Group. It's been translated into 18 languages, including Greek, and has been well received globally. The Athens Macedonian news agency and the Sky Group new media platform are carrying Historic Journey on their website and on social media. The programme aims to help people in Greece understand China's course of development under the leadership of the Communist Party of China and to deepen communication between the two sides. Let's cross over to Zimbabwe now, where the new low-denomination banknotes failed to arrive, leaving banks in confusion and customers frustrated. The shortage of cash, along with shortages of staple goods exacerbated by a long drought, has sent inflation to its highest level since 2008, estimated at 380% year on year. Well, banking executives say that they have not received new bills as expected. They also said that no communication from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe about why the notes had not been distributed has been received. In 2008, hyperinflation wiped out many Zimbabweans' pensions and savings and forced the southern African country to dump the Zimbabwe dollar currency. In June this year, the government unexpectedly ended a decade of dollarization by reintroducing the Zimbabwe dollar to give it more flexibility in shaping monetary policy. Meanwhile, Ethiopia is currently battling an outbreak of desert locusts, which is devastating swathes of farmland in parts of the country. The UN warns that there is a need to urgently scale up preventive measures to prevent the infestation spreading further and possibly across the border. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy spoke to the Desert Locust Control Organization for Eastern Africa, which is involved in curbing the spread.
In this laboratory in Addis Ababa, samples of the desert locusts that have invaded Ethiopia are being monitored by the Desert Locust Control Organization for Eastern Africa. Back in the field, they have caused havoc, attacking 4 of Ethiopia's 9 regions. The organization says moist soils, due to the continued rainfall in breeding sites, created a conducive environment for them to multiply.
Desert locusts breed on the Red Sea coast, and those are the countries of Eritrea, Yemen, Sudan, and Somalia. And when the conditions are good, they breed and become migratory. So this time as we speak, they have invaded Ethiopia now. And I would like to say that we are making very huge efforts to control these locusts, because if left uncontrolled, they really devastate crops.
Already, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization says locusts are consuming at least 1.7 million tons of green vegetation per day. Government says some farmers in affected regions are complaining of losing all their crops. The Ministry of Agriculture is spraying insecticides on the ground, while the Desert Control Organization is in charge of aerial control.
We expect that these operations could go on up to mid-December. By mid-December, we will know where we are. But about that is the time frame we have. But if it becomes necessary to go on, we are ready to do that. In fact, in Ethiopia now, because of the severity of the invasion, we have deployed 2 aircrafts.
The locust controllers say more danger lies with this immature breed.
The experts here say that the locusts have laid eggs in the field, so it will be important for them to go back after the eggs have hatched into hoppers and spray again. This will help to greatly reduce the invasion.
In November and December, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization and the government are turning their attention to the breeding grounds. The UN has warned Kenya, Eritrea and Sudan to be on alert to control any invasion early, just in case the swarms spread from Ethiopia. Coletta Wanjoy, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
As environmental ministers from across the continent converge on South Africa, various parts of East and Southern Africa have been battling erratic weather conditions. Somalia is still grappling with the effects from one of the worst floods to hit the country. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo brings us more now from Mogadishu.
Reconstruction exercises commenced along a 5-kilometer stretch of road linking the town of Beledweyne and the rest of the country. Engineers are filling damaged sections of the roads with massive stones and sand as a temporary measure to restore transportation that was affected due to recent floods.
The recent floods destroyed the roads linking various neighborhoods. It is not public transport vehicles only that have been affected. Privately owned vehicles also cannot access the main road. We want the authorities to expedite renovation exercise.
Weeks of flooding in this town destroyed basic infrastructure. Floodwaters turned roads into rivers. Authorities say the ongoing renovations will restore movement of people and vehicles, but will not offer a permanent solution to recurrent flooding that has affected Beledweyne.
We are renovating key roads that link Beledweyne to the port cities of Bosaso and Mogadishu. Our commodities are brought here from the cities. A team of engineers is leading the exercise to renovate damaged roads and fill it with sand and stones before cementing it. Restoring movement of transport is very critical for a city recovering from these deadly floods.
Regional authorities have now appealed for support in the rebuilding of a city devastated by floodwaters.
The hardest part is returning people to their homes and rebuilding a city destroyed by weeks of flooding. Last year, we witnessed similar floods, but we were able to control the situation and return things to normal in less than 3 months. This year, we witnessed a much bigger impact, and that needs concerted effort.
Heavy rains and floods forced close to 300,000 people to abandon their homes. Schools and hospitals were among those affected. Many are still reluctant to return to their homes after health officials warned of the possibility of an outbreak of waterborne diseases. It's the worst flooding to hit Beledweyne in recent years. Authorities have now been urged to ensure that a long-term solution is implemented before the next rainy season. Abdulaziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Meanwhile, South Sudan's government is calling on humanitarian agencies to provide aid for those displaced by flooding. The United Nations says that more than 900,000 people have been displaced by floodwaters. CG10's Patrick Oyet reports.
South Sudan's government says flooding has limited people's access to healthcare facilities and other basic services. According to the country's health ministry, many hospitals in flood-affected areas are submerged and schools are closed. The United Nations says more than 60% of South Sudan's population is already facing malnutrition, and that situation is likely to get worse as a result of the flooding, which is destroying crops and impacting food security. South Sudan's Ministry of Health says it fears there could also be a disease outbreak. It is calling on aid agencies to support those displaced.
The situation may be worse afterward in terms of food security, for instance. And this also is true with health. Health will even be more worse after the flood is over. And this is where we should have these two plans.
The United Nations says it needs more funds to try and mitigate these challenges.
Some money will be mobilized to also support across all the sectors, not only health, across all the sectors. So just to reassure you that this is ongoing, and of course internally, within different organizations, a lot of resources is being mobilized. For us at WHO, we are already looking at our own internal emergency response.
Millions of people were displaced by South Sudan's 5-year war, which ended in 2018. The United Nations says around 500,000 people have returned home during peacetime over the past year. But recent flooding has again displaced many in the country, with heavy rains expected to continue for the next 4 weeks. And when the dry season follows, it is likely that there will be no crops for farmers to cultivate, and the UN believes many of the displaced will be dependent on food aid for another 6 months. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Over $300 million is needed to help Malawi recover from the devastating effects of cyclones Idai and Kenneth that hit the southern African nation earlier this year. According to the government, pledges made by international donors have not been forthcoming, leaving many households in dire need of assistance. 200 households have so far been successfully relocated to higher ground. CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy with this report.
In early March 2019, Malawi experienced one of the worst tropical cyclones that formed in the Mozambican Channel, bringing heavy rains and strong winds. Severe flooding negatively affected people's lives, pushing more people into poverty. In total, an estimated 975,000 people were affected, with 86,976 displaced, 60 killed, and 672 injured. The devastating heavy rains and floods caused substantive damage and loss across much of the southern parts of the country. The government says the country has not been able to attract enough financial support to rebuild lives and fast-track early recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction after cyclones Idai and Kenneth.
Right now, we are still calling upon our partners, international NGOs, even international government, to come to the rescue of these people.
Most of the affected areas remain without shelter, with limited access to safe water and sanitation facilities. The World Bank and African Development Bank have committed $50 and $22 million respectively towards recovery.
As of now, those are the funds that we can confidently say that I think they have been committed for the recovery. So you can see that it means we are still with a huge gap of about $300 million yet to be resourced to reconstruct the infrastructure that was destroyed. According to the government's post-disaster needs assessment, the total cost for recovery has been pegged at $370 million. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Malawi.
Back to Somalia, where environmentalists have launched a tree planting program as the country battles a series of climate-related disasters. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Below now reports.
These volunteers are planting trees at an abandoned compound of what was once a prestigious learning institution on the outskirts of Mogadishu. The tree planting exercise is part of a major campaign dubbed Somalia Green Revolution that seeks to have thousands of trees planted all across the country. Similar campaigns have taken place in various schools as environmental activists hope to raise awareness of the climate changes and the importance of protecting nature.
Protecting the environment is important. We were taught that even in our religious schools. Planting trees will help protect the ecosystem and will ensure climate change migration comes to an end. We are encouraging locals to plant more trees.
Last month, authorities raised the alarm over the possibility of deadly floods in the country. Currently, close to 300,000 people have been displaced in various regions of the country after Shabelle and Juba rivers broke their banks, flooding major towns, destroying farmlands and basic infrastructure.
We're expecting rains from October to December. We can have two things. Those rains can create a flood in the country because, we never been clean all those rivers. And if you don't have rains, the worst is on the way. We have to take serious and tackle together.
In the past decade, the Horn of African nation has suffered a devastating famine, drought and floods. In 2011, 250,000 people lost their lives in the worst drought in 60 years. Since then, repetitive climatic shocks continue to displace hundreds of thousands.
Climate change has been scientifically proven on the continent. It is quite evident in the Horn of Africa. We are seeing countries in the world placing more emphasis in tackling climate-related challenges. That's what Somalia should embark on, protecting the environment.
Experts attribute recent natural disasters to climate change. In other parts of the country, authorities have urged local communities to stop cutting down trees for charcoal. Aid agencies have also been urged to increase resilience programs in some of the flood and drought-affected regions to ensure locals are not displaced in the event of future climate-related shocks. Abdulaziz Bilal, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Environment ministers have converged on South Africa's coastal city of Durban for the 17th ordinary session of the African Ministerial Conference on the Environment. The conference will focus on turning environmental policies into action, as well as the need to invest in innovative environmental solutions. Here's CGTN's Yulisa Njumelo with more.
The meeting comes as 52 million people in 18 countries across the African continent face hunger as a result of extremities in weather, and that's according to Oxfam. Oxfam is a confederation of 19 independent charitable organizations focusing on the alleviation of global poverty. The report indicates that countries like Zimbabwe, Zambia, Angola, Malawi, Mozambique, Madagascar and Namibia have collectively suffered an average annual losses of $700 million from climate-related disasters. These are the pertinent issues that the environmental ministers from across the continent will be discussing at the conference. The conference will also deal with the issue of having to take practical actions by the ministers to deal with the current issues. Those practical solutions include implementation of policies, relevant regional and global frameworks in order for the continent to attain environmental sustainability and prosperity, and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and Africa's Agenda 2063. The conference will include a meeting of expert groups who will feed critical information to the ministers. Yodisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including DR Congo forces kill leader of splinter Hutu armed group. And Paris to set quotas for immigrant workers from 2020.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
To the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the army says that it has killed a Rwanda militia leader and 4 of his bodyguards in an operation near to the DRC-Uganda border. General Juvenal Musabyimana was killed in an intense battle in North Kivu province. He was a commander of the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, a Hutu militia that was formed after the 1994 Rwandan genocide. CGTN's Chris Ochemringa has more.
A statement from the Congolese army says General Juvenal Musabyimana was killed in a clash in the eastern town of Rutshuru on Saturday. Musabyimana was a former officer in the Rwandan armed forces who fled to the DRC after the Rwandan genocide of 1994. He was among the Hutu refugees who created the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda in eastern Congo. His killing comes 2 months after that of another FDLR commander, Sylvester Mudachumura. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame and DRC's Felix Tshisekedi have agreed to work together to get rid of Rwandan rebels operating in eastern DRC. Last Friday, the Congolese army spokesperson said their troops killed 25 rebels of the Allied Democratic Forces in Beni. The Allied Democratic Forces is a Ugandan Islamist militia that operates in eastern DRC. The Congolese army has launched a large-scale military operation to wipe out all armed groups in eastern DRC. The rebels have killed many civilians and attacked healthcare workers trying to contain the Ebola outbreak. Chris Ochemringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
To South Africa now, and the CHOC Childhood Cancer Foundation has held a hat and heel competition in the capital, Cape Town. The event sought to raise funds and public awareness on cancer in children. It attracted hundreds of local participants who wore hats and high heels of their own design. It's estimated that at least 2/3 of children with cancer never reach a treatment centre, and of those that do, most are in the later stages of the disease. By sharing information on childhood cancer, the foundation hopes to change attitudes and practices and thereby reduce cancer mortality and morbidity in children.
Many families in South Africa find themselves in poverty-stricken situations, and they do not have basic needs that are being met. And so, for instance, from traveling to the hospital and back again, or accessing a healthy nutritional meal is very hard for a family. And the burden or the diagnosis of cancer places an extra burden on the families. And we support those families holistically so that they can focus on the well-being of their child and the diagnosis, and not on all the other socio-economic challenges that they have. And therefore our program is very comprehensive. The accommodation, the practical support, the transport fund, the food hampers, it helps families so that they can focus on the child and not on all the other challenges that they face.
Paris will start setting quotas for immigrant workers from 2020 as the government tightens its policies on immigration. The government will work with employers to identify gaps that could be filled by foreign workers. Many Tunisians choose to immigrate to France due to France's favourable economic conditions. Some do so legally and others illegally. CG10's Adnan Chouachi reports from Tunis.
Many employment bureaus owners are skeptical about the decision of French authorities and their tighter migration plans. They believe the new migration policy will have a negative impact on their business.
This is a sovereign decision that we respect, but the quota will affect our revenues and ruin some employment bureaus while increasing unemployment. We sell contracts and full packages for skilled migrants. Now the procedure has just become more complicated.
Over 60,000 Tunisian university graduates, engineers, technicians and skilled workers migrated legally to France in 2019. Their number is set to decrease in 2020.
France is closing the door to legal migration. Getting a visa is already complicated, long and expensive. The quota is a move in the wrong direction. Now Tunisian competencies will think twice before applying for migration to France.
Analysts assert that France cannot close its doors to skilled migrants, while thousands of workers will never be allowed access to Europe.
The European Union will follow suit if France approves the new migration plan. This is a universal tendency with the rise of the far right, which is hostile to migration. France needs Tunisian and African competencies.
In 2019, the increase by 25% in the number of Tunisians whose visa demands were rejected has shocked the civil society. In addition, visa applicants are not reimbursed, while each application costs around $200.
The Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights has condemned France's tighter migration plans. Experts say this project will cause an unprecedented wave of illegal and irregular migration of African youths who will strive to reach European shores from the North African coasts. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Foreign Affairs ministers from the Intergovernmental Authority for Development region have met in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. The leaders have discussed a new extension to the formation of a transitional government in South Sudan. The Council of Ministers demand that the peace agreement guidelines will be set without delay and agreed that the extended 100 days should be used to resolve outstanding issues. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoe now reports.
The Intergovernmental Authority for Development says the parties to the South Sudan peace agreement had 63 tasks to complete before a new government is formed, but only 31 have been completed. Of the remaining, IGAD says 9 are critical to the immediate formation of the transitional government.
Transitional period tasks in the security sector, such as cantonment, registration, screening, training, unification, and deployment of unified forces, and operationalization of the DR Commission are lagging behind.
The parties are yet to agree on the boundaries of states, as well as allocation of ministerial positions. The United Nations says it is also vital that sanctions by IGAD against opposition leader Riek Machar be lifted.
This ongoing obstacle is surely not difficult to fix with some creative thinking. To promote face-to-face meetings and to enable him to be able to move around to do that, it should be resolved. Nor can it be that difficult for South Sudan government to issue Dr. Riek Machar with a South Sudanese passport in the spirit of building trust and confidence between the parties.
The African Union, which was earlier opposed to an extension of the 12th November deadline for a transitional government in South Sudan, says the power to bring stability to South Sudan largely lies with its leaders.
These people of South Sudan demand urgent peace and not war anymore. These citizens understand that not all outstanding issues in the peace agreement can be resolved overnight. However, they also know that if the parties wish for the country to return to normal life, this can be achieved.
The South Sudan government has given its commitment.
I would be remiss not to mention here the importance of positive messaging by the parties IGAD member states, regional and international partners in creating a conducive environment for the parties to effectively and efficiently use the 100 days to complete the pending task.
The parties have agreed to continue regular dialogue to bridge the mistrust among them.
The region is asking the parties to the South Sudan peace agreement to exercise high level of compromise in resolving outstanding issues. They hope this will be the last extension to the deadline of forming a transitional government in the country that has suffered internal conflict since 2013.
IGAD will review progress made by the parties after 50 days. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Evo Morales has announced that he will resign as president of Bolivia after the military called for him to step down amid weeks of unrest over disputed election results. CGTN's Dan Collins has more.
He was stepping down for the good of the country. His statement comes after the commander-in-chief of the Bolivian armed forces urged him to resign for the pacification of the country. In Bolivia's main city, La Paz, people poured onto the streets, waving the national flags on hearing the news. Morales' vice president, Alvaro Garcia Linera, also resigned. Earlier on Sunday, Morales said he would call a new election after the Organization of American States identified serious irregularities in the vote in October. It said it could not verify a first-round victory for Morales. Carlos Mesa, the runner-up candidate in the disputed election, said Morales' decision marked the end of tyranny. The weeks-long standoff over the disputed election escalated over the weekend when police forces were seen joining anti-government protests. At least 3 people have been killed and more than 300 injured in the clashes since October the 20th, the day of the election. Dan Collins, CGTN, Lima.
Hong Kong SAR Chief Executive Carrie Lam has given a statement on what is said to be one of the worst days of violence since protests erupted in June. Our reporter Zhao Yunfei has more.
Carrie Lam sent out a strong message today. Usually the chief executive holds press briefing every Tuesday, but today is an exception. She says the reason she wants to speak out today is because she wants to tell radical protesters that no matter how hard they try, they won't receive any political gains. She says once they are satisfied, more violence will break out. And Lam says there are 60 incidents that took place today. Among them, 2 were severe. One is the outcome of police shooting operation, and another is an individual man were set on fire. Lam says both of the cases are not actions to pursue freedom, but making enemies with peaceful citizens. She says every time there was an incident, there were rumors online. Lam called to society to calm down and face the matters rationally. She asked Hong Kong people to put down prejudice, to make the society come to peace.
Well, let's now go to Panina Karibe for all the latest business news. Over to you.
Thank you, Karen. And coming up on Africa Live Business, Africa Development Bank eyes deals worth $67 billion at flagship investment conference in South Africa. And Zambia's President Edgar Lungu cuts government spending to control debt levels.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The African Development Bank is targeting to raise investments worth about $67 billion at its flagship investment conference in South Africa. The bank has earmarked 59 projects across 29 countries. The projects range from regional infrastructure development to investments in energy, financial services, urban housing, and small business support. Inadequate power, railways, ports, and roads in Africa has frustrated productivity by as much as 40%. The infrastructure gap has also reduced the continent's per capita economic growth by about 2.2 percentage points. Despite this, FDB President Akinwumi Adesina says while the global economy is showing signs of weakness, investors are increasingly paying attention to Africa. South African mobile operator Vodacom has reported an 18.9% rise in half-year profits. This is partially as a result of the absence of one-off costs related to a share scheme offered to black investors. After initially rising, Vodacom's shares fell over 2% despite the improved result, with revenue flat in South Africa and growth in overall group service revenue slowing. Service revenue rose just 0.3% for the 6 months to September, while its overall group service revenue rose 4.2%. Headline earnings per share, which is the main profit measure in South Africa, rose to 460 cents. Vodacom now reaches a combined 115 million customers group-wide, with Safaricom, Kenya's largest mobile operator, which Vodacom partly owns, alone adding 2.7 million customers. Zambia is committed to ensuring that debt is contained within sustainable levels through continued austerity measures. This is according to the country's president, Edgar Lungu. Africa's second copper producer is struggling with high debt levels and shrinking foreign currency reserves. Zambia's external debt rose to $10 billion at the end of last year. In 2017, the country's debt stood at $8.74 billion. There are fears that the country is headed for a debt crisis. The International Monetary Fund has said growth is likely to remain subdued over the medium term. In an effort to counter this, the government has suspended some infrastructure projects. It has also cut travel expenditure for senior officials. Zambia has also delayed the receipt of loans totaling $2.6 billion contracted last year to rein in its soaring debt. Virgin Atlantic, in partnership with Investec, have hosted the Business as an Adventure Conference in Johannesburg. The gathering saw leading South African business minds come together to share insights on creating dynamic and inclusive businesses in a fast-evolving digital world. CGTN's Angelo Coppola was there and brings you the following report.
Business leaders at Virgin's Business is an Adventure gathering agree that diversity is the key to creating successful companies. Many, including futurist Faith Popcorn, drew on South African Rugby World Cup success as an example.
Look at Springboks. The first time a rugby team has been so integrated, and they won. And that's the lesson for the boardroom. The more you integrate, the more you get other opinions, different ways of looking at things, the more money you make, the more you win.
South Africa is still a largely unequal society. Despite attempts at empowerment, women and black people remain the worst affected by joblessness and increasing poverty.
I think we have to do everything we can to get that gender equality moving. And to do that, really, we have to look at education. So we have to be educating people of every color, of every kind, so that when they walk into a boardroom or a meeting room, they feel comfortable and confident. And I think that it starts there.
The country is forced to import professional skills which are in short supply. It's one of the most notable constraints as the market positions itself for the fourth industrial revolution.
Companies should be focusing on data and should be focusing on artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think that really is the next wave that's going to come and hit a lot of companies. And if you focus on those things and get the right data accumulation in place and the right skills in place to take advantage of that, I think you're going to build diverse businesses.
Business heavyweights are also taking stock of South Africa's economy, which is teetering on the edge of junk status. But they do believe that the country can turn it around and create more inclusive growth. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Nigeria's first train wagons assembly plant has been launched in Kajola Town, Ogun State. The Chinese-funded project will help railway operators access locally produced equipment. It is also expected to drive the development of railway-related industries in the country. After completion, the plant will have the capacity to produce 500 standard-gauge freight wagons per year. It is expected to create 5,000 direct and indirect jobs for the locals. Nigerian Vice President Yemi Osinbanjo, who attended the launch, said that the assembly plant project is of great significance to the modernization of Nigeria's railway industry. China's civil engineering group is financing the project.
For us, this vehicle assembly plant is a very useful attempt in Nigeria. Most of the components are likely to be produced in China and assembled in Nigeria. The follow-up may be based on Nigeria's socio-economic development and will gradually consider increasing local employment and development.
The 23rd meeting of the Intergovernmental Committee of Senior Officials of East Africa has wrapped up in Asmara, Ethiopia. Participants expressed the need to implement these solutions to economic growth and integration of the continent. CGTN's Grim Chala sat with the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Vera Songwe, to discuss the involvement of private sectors in Africa's regional development.
It's really about the small and medium enterprise that is trying to trade between Kenya and Tanzania, Uganda and Sudan, Seychelles and Eritrea. And what we're trying to do is create that environment for it to happen. And we believe that already being in Asmara is part of the CFTA, because we were able to bring over 150 people to Asmara, first for tourism. The conversation we're having is about how the CFTA can boost tourism, but to visit a country, you have to have been there once before, and part of this conversation is to bring people here. We hope that the state of Eritrea has been very generous and is going to take people around to show them a little bit the country, and so many more people will come. So it is about openness, and it is about Africans understanding that within our continent there are markets for a lot more than raw materials.
Where will the money come from to support this billions of dollars investment?
It's coming from the continent to begin with. We've just finished a report with the Economic Commission for Africa on domestic resource mobilization. It's coming from pension funds on the continent, it's coming from development banks on the continent, it's coming from our revenues. Again, I think that when we talk about financing development on the continent, there is always a sense that the resources come from without the continent. But the largest share of development financing for Africa comes from African taxpayers, and that will continue for a long time. So the first thing that we're doing is seeing how we can enhance that contribution, and then secondly, working with pension funds within the continent and then without the continent. Some countries will continue to need concessional financing from institutions like the African Development Bank, the World Bank and others, and that will also be part of where those resources come from.
Well, on the other hand, people criticize the fact that the African Union, UNECA, in this continent, when they exert efforts of bringing the private sector on board to support or perhaps lead some of the initiatives of more development in Africa, they have failed somehow, or they have achieved less than it was anticipated in the beginning. Now, how are we going to redefine this and perhaps bring more private sector involvement in the development activities of this region, for instance?
The World Bank just released the doing business indicators, and Togo jumped 40 points in that. Essentially, it means that Togo has improved its doing business environment and has been one of the fastest countries that has done reform in improving the business environment. One-stop shops across the continent is something that we need. Digitization of processes is something that we need. I think the good news, again, is that many more countries are looking at doing business. Kenya is a good example that has been doing historically well on the doing business indicator. Morocco is another country that's been doing well. Mauritania has been doing well. I think a lot more African countries have awoken to the fact that you do need to increase and improve the business environment to be able to attract the private sector. 90% of the GDP of the continent comes from small and medium enterprises on the continent that are doing well. And I think what we need to do, and what we hope that the CFTA will do, is to be able to create a lot more of those. We also need the big businesses and the sort of conglomerates to be able to power the rest of the economy.
And just a quick point of correction, Asmara is in Eritrea and not Ethiopia, I beg your pardon. Now, Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba set a sales record on Singles Day, the world's largest 24-hour shopping event. Gross merchandise value, a figure that shows sales across Alibaba's shopping platforms, surpassed last year's nearly $30.5 billion on Monday afternoon and kept rising through the rest of the day. At the end of the event, GMV stood at $38.3 billion, just under 26% rise from the figure posted last year. That's a slower growth rate than the 27% seen on last year's Singles Day. This was the 11th edition of the annual Singles Day event, also called the Double 11 Shopping Festival. Alibaba's Singles Day sales last year exceeded the spending by consumers during any single US shopping holiday, such as Black Friday or Cyber Monday. Now, Double 11, also known as Singles Day in China, falls on November 11th, and it's widely considered the world's largest online shopping day. It's the day that Chinese e-commerce platforms enjoy their best sales, and it's also a day to connect customers and manufacturers, a rising trend in the e-commerce industry. CGTN reporter Zhou Jiaxin has the story.
No matter how much Miss Wan used her broom, her pet shed hair and caused her trouble every day. But the booming e-commerce industry in China now able to tailor to one's needs, providing her with a personalized sweeping robot at a lower price.
The function has been stable, and it's doing a really good job in cleaning the dog's hair and dust. I don't need to bend down. It saves me time and hands.
Wan herself also wonders how the manufacturers know her needs and sell robot products such as this at only $38. Wu Pengyuan, leader of an R&D team for robot products, says big data shared by e-commerce platforms inspires their initiatives.
Big data tells us public demands are not from us. They demand a robot able to clean the floor and absorb dust, but costing them about $40.
To secure the price for the customized robot, which is likely half of the original cost, Wu's team has to drop a high-cost imported motor while developing their own that is consistent in terms of quality. The team also drops their rest days so as to gear up for Double 11, the world's biggest day for online shopping.
We've got 3 additional production lines for Double 11, and its capacity could reach 10,000.
Pinduoduo, one of China's top e-commerce players, says the platform encourages a customer-to-manufacturer or C2M option by adopting a non-commission strategy.
Once qualified and cashed as deposit, all manufacturers can start businesses with no more charges for each order.
It's going to change the entire production model. Previously, producers produce things and try to sell things. Now it's different. Now we can do individualized production. We can do inventory control. We don't have to carry a lot of inventory. So there's a lot of efficiencies that can be squeezed out of this process. That means there will be better pricing. There will be more consumption. And also it enlarges the economic pie. So I think this is actually a very fundamental development that's going to do very good things about the economy.
Experts say the revolutionary C2M option has been a vision since e-commerce began. Its eventual delivery doesn't just showcase the technology, but the key value of commerce. Zhou Jiaxin, CGTN.
We shall leave it there for now on Africa Live Business. But ahead on global business, regulators crack the whip on over 50 fund management companies in Ghana. We'll be live in Accra for more details on that story. And that's at the top of the hour. I shall see you then. For now, back to you, Karen.
Okay, thank you very much, Penina. We are going to a short break now. We've got all the sports news coming up for you, including... Bafana Bafana travelled to Ghana ahead of their AFCON qualifier on Thursday.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours?